afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Erik Bush. I am the CEO of Demand Driven Technologies and founder, and delighted to be here with you today to speak about building supply chain agility. We're going to focus on that through the concept of sales and operations planning and demand planning, and give you some illustrations on kind of a different approach to addressing the sales and operation planning needs that you may have. For reference, we will be in listen-only mode during the presentation. We are eager to have your questions, though, so you can utilize the Zoom question panel on your screen there to ask questions along the way, and then we'll cover those at the end of the session. We are recording the session, so you'll be able to get access to that when we send out the link to the recording. And as well, the presentation material will be available as well as a PDF that you can utilize downstream and share with your colleagues and the like. We are also going to be asking polling questions today. We use this as a technique for understanding kind of the audience's perspective on various topics, and as well, it helps us improve our strategies and our solutions and the like as we go forward. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? We'll talk a little bit about market realities. I tend to lead off every presentation with a view of kind of the state of the market that we think is problematic and needs to be improved on. And our goal is to obviously help with that story. We'll take a quick look at the traditional concepts around sales and operations planning, where there's limitations of those, and then introduce the demand-driven sales and operations planning approach as a different way of addressing a very critical function in manufacturers and distributors. And we'll talk about the path forward. We'll also include a demonstration of some of the unique Intuiflow functionalities that you would find helpful in the S&OP arena. Many of you have seen this chart before. I will continue presenting it until it starts making a material change. The reality, according to data from the U.S. Federal Reserve, is that U.S. manufacturers are turning inventory pretty much at the same rate they were 25 years ago. And that's what this inventory over sales line kind of depicts. You'll see in the middle of the horizon here that we've got the pointer going here. Some of the economic benefits of the heady times that led into the Great Recession in the 08-09 kind of time frame. And then, as you can see here, in the subsequent years, including a spike at the beginning of the pandemic, things were moving in the wrong direction. There's roughly $1 trillion of inventory in U.S. manufacturing. And you would think with all the investment that companies have made in ERP, supply chain planning solutions and the like, that things would have gotten better by now, but fundamentally they haven't. There's lots of reasons for that, but most core to all of it is that the planning logic that we are utilizing in our ERP systems and the supply chain vendors that are out there is dependent on a concept called material requirements planning, which has a very basic formula. Since you can't wait till the order comes in to start all the things to make sure you can satisfy that order, you have to rely on a forecast, so that you can backward schedule and plan into the future the things you need to buy, make, and distribute to meet that demand. And fundamentally, that assumes that our forecast is accurate and that there will be no variation on that horizon, which are very, very flawed assumptions. Our demand-driven philosophies allow you to pace to the real demand in the market. And it's how you do that that should be the focus of our S&OP efforts, not the conventional ways of thinking. And obviously, too, there's VUCA conditions out there, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We're dealing with inaccurate forecasts. We've got staffing issues, both in planning and at the plants. We find ourselves in perpetual firefighting. We've had SKU proliferation running amok as we try to compete in our various markets. And inevitably, we're finding our way through a lot of workarounds just to try to keep the ship afloat in the uncertain times that we're dealing with. So a lot of people in the industry are talking about agility and resilience, or resilience and agility, terms like that. And the idea is that we found out through the pandemic and other impacts of the aftershock of the economic conditions of the last few years that we got to be a lot less brittle. We need to be more resilient, more agile, whatever. And these are books, the definitions of those two terms. Agile is I can move with quick and easy grace, adapt to kind of whatever comes my way. Resilience means I can overcome shocks to the system, right? And I think every supply chain professional would think having more of that in their environment would be a great thing. But the path there starts with one fundamental shift in our mindset. And that is that we have to accept that we can't predict the future. And so we have to embrace the one thing we do know is that the future is uncertain. We have to embrace the certainty of an uncertain future. And this shift in thinking is really, really critical if we're going to make any fundamental changes to how we build, how we operate, how we react to the market, and things like that. So, admirable goals of agility and resilience, but they start with a shift in our mindset that says we accept that the future is uncertain, so we should instead then figure out how we can be adaptable and flexible to meet whatever that demand is that is coming our way. So we've got a couple polling questions, and I would really appreciate all your participation on this, and Kevin will launch them here. First, we'd like to know if you have a process. Many clients kind of started down that path and then abandoned it, and others have it kind of in a kind of casual fashion. Eager to get the perspective of the audience here in terms of the level of S&OP process activity out there.
We'll give everyone a few seconds to get their answer in. We have more people in the webinar than we've had in the past, which is a good problem to have. I'll give everyone 10 more seconds.
Really appreciate your feedback, folks. Okay, 31% indicate it's there, but it's not consistent. You know, it's not as rigorous or formal of a process is the way I interpret that. 46% saying they do have a process and it's run monthly or quarterly. 23% saying they don't. So let's go to the next one, Kevin.
1 second. Okay.
So just trying to understand what is the principal goal, and obviously everybody could click all the above because these all look like potential benefits, but try to pick the one or two that are really most relevant in the S&OP dialogue you have. And obviously, if you're not in a process, your answer won't be required here.
All right, we've almost got everyone. I'll give 10 more seconds.
Okay. 17% indicate revenue and profit projections and working capital. 39% indicate capacity challenges. 31 are seeing inventory exposures, and then 39% say all of the above. So very helpful. Thank you for that. All right. So let's talk about S&OP. What are the expected goals of an S&OP process? We're going to go through this rather quickly because I think everybody pretty much understands the concepts, but I want to kind of get to some of the points of failure that we observe. Obviously, we want to get aligned on materials and operations about what we're expecting to sell in the market. You know, the convention is that we build a consensus demand plan and then we build a consensus supply plan. And, you know, we're hoping that all those things line up to help us meet the market needs. That should allow us to be ready for that demand when it comes, and we start putting planning activities in place to help us address that, both from a material planning production standpoint. And it's trying to get everybody on the same page. We've got alignment. You know, sales has told us what they think. The supply planning people, operations have had a voice at the table. Everybody's involved in it, and that's really kind of the goal. So to get there, you have to do kind of the following steps. You got to go through forecasting and demand planning. They're both opposite sides of the same coin. You then build your supply plan. You do a series of meetings, both pre-S&OP and then the executive S&OP meeting. And these are kind of foundational to getting organizational buy-in and acceptance of the plan. And then we go out and implement. So forecasting, we're typically starting with statistical forecasts. We're going to get some level of input from the sales function, maybe even finance, maybe other external sources. People are going to bring data in that will help improve our forecast. And, there's other internal and external factors. There'll be a series of discussions going on internally. If you're also doing demand planning, that means you're going to kind of start massaging the plan or the forecast a fair bit. You may be deciding to forecast at levels of aggregation because you find that your accuracy of the forecast improves at the aggregate level, while at the same time, unfortunately, that probably means that at the item level, it's not really as accurate as you were thinking it would be. It helps to socialize, get further feedback. We kind of get to that point where in the process we say, okay, here's the demand plan that we're going to work from. That then leads into a supply plan. And as you can see, there's some serial nature to this process. That is part of why it takes a while to conduct these. We're going to see if there's impacts on our production resources, as mentioned in the poll. We're going to probably share a view of this ultimately with our suppliers so that they know what our forecast is and they can predict your requirements to their plants and the like. And we may try to tee up some tactics to address risk areas and whatnot. And clearly there may be some back and forth with sales and the demand planning side to say, well, we think this or that, maybe this won't happen. Last month you were wrong. Those kind of dialogues will happen. Ultimately, at this point, though, we've got a demand plan, we've got a supply plan, we think we're ready to go. We're going to go inform management, key operational stakeholders in sales, operations, procurement, and the like. We'll kind of review the plan and we'll agree. And once we have kind of burnished off any of the rough edges, we'll then take it up to the executives for approval. And, then we've kind of got our marching orders. Here's how we're going to go execute. We implement it. We establish the action plans. We start tracking our progress against it. And in most cases, what we find is that there's a breakdown, that the forecasts weren't as accurate as we were hoping for, despite all the effort we put into it. There's gaps between actual and forecast by period. The forecast continues evolving during the period because of changes in the demand signals in the market and the like. Maybe we did a little too much demand smoothing or category level planning, and as a result, we're seeing distortions at key items that are important in the market. And there's a lot of noise in the system. On the supplier side, we may be impacted by issues that emerge. We may find that we've got to continually adjust the supply plan, meaning that we're canceling orders with suppliers or expediting at the same time other items just because of the inherent shift in the demand signal that's coming at us from what we were planning to. A lot of firefighting, especially if things are highly distorted in reality from what the forecast was intended to be. And what's happening is that then, as people go through this process year over year, and it just doesn't seem to yield the results, then you get this complacency building into the organization where people become skeptical. The sales guys are always forecasting too high because they're paranoid we won't have product, and that causes all sorts of operational problems. We start, because of that, developing compensating actions like that's their forecast, but this is what we're going to plan to. We start losing faith that this process is going in the right direction. And there's a lot of work. I mean, when I was in this role, I was VP of the operations in the consulting division at IBM. Trying to get alignment between what the forecast was from the partners and what the capacity needs of the consulting skills was a really, really difficult process. And oftentimes it didn't yield any real benefits. And so then you get into the real dangerous period where you're starting to just kind of go through the motions and tolerating the process, not really using it for what it should be done for. So where did things go wrong, right? Obviously, anytime we plan ahead, we are committing to the assumption that the forecast is accurate. And that is at a point in time well before demand is known. So we start spinning up activities and things like that for a future that is yet to become evident. And we're relying on our forecasts. And that inaccuracy is a big, big cause of the issues. All the effort that we put in yields these inaccurate forecasts. We start losing our energy and our confidence levels about that. Our suppliers can both cause and be subject to variation. It could be because they have issues on their own side, or because we're making changes to them that they're not in a good position to deal with. So it's kind of a two-way street on that front. And the same story goes in operations, where they may have disruptions that occur on their side. It could be, plant floor shop, labor staff fluctuations or machine breakdowns, or they're getting variation in the signal as to what's required in the market. We're trying to break into the production schedule because we've got urgent needs from a big client, you name it, lots and lots and lots of firefighting, and it creates substantial amount of stress in the organization. So let's ask the question here about whether you're satisfied with your company's S&OP process helping you create more agility in your business. Highly satisfied down to highly dissatisfied.
All right, about 10 more seconds, everyone.
Okay. No one is highly satisfied. 35% are satisfied, 57% are dissatisfied, and 8% are highly dissatisfied. And we ran a similar webinar like this last year, and those results are kind of in line with what we saw at that point in time. So yeah, there's a lot of frustration out there. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And so let's continue on so we can start exploring some of the strategies you can implement to help bring those to light. Thanks, Kevin. All right, so the big question is, how are we going to build agility and responsiveness? If we have that, then we can kind of pivot and respond to whatever comes our way. And if we had that, we would have a lot less stress in our system. We would be kind of set up to deal with whatever eventual realities we're going to have to confront and satisfy. So it really means we have to change our thought. We have to first embrace this idea that the future is uncertain. When we do that, then we change the way we think about S&OP. Instead of being in this mode of focusing on organizational alignment, consensus demand plan, consensus supply plan, we need to start thinking about how do we build agility into our business? How do we get to that position of being able to respond to whatever the future might bring? Instead of putting all that energy into getting that unified consensus forecast and all that stuff, what if we took and saved that money and effort that goes into that and put it into increased capacity in certain capabilities, or changing our supplier relationships or things of that nature? How do we deal with a flawed demand signal? If we pace to the most accurate demand signal we're ever going to get it here on the right in terms of the true demand, and we can achieve that consistently, then we are in a far, far better position. We've got heavily coupled dependencies in MRP. It is a highly dependent planning approach. It has the well-known effect of the bullwhip effect, where variations at one end of the system or the other tend to amplify themselves as it goes through. In our case, we recommend the use of strategic decoupling to help reduce the impact of variation. Decoupling takes some of that dependence and breaks it down into layers in the supply chain, or points of decoupling within your bills of material. Instead of this heavy cross-functional celestial alignment, as I refer, let's get all the planets and stars lined up here, maybe we can focus on a much lighter weight, easier to manage exception management approach. Instead of trying to get all those things perfectly aligned, why don't we just look for the edge cases where things might get out of control? And if we do that, there's going to be less things to focus on. It's going to be easier to put our attention and more emphasis on those things that really need to be thought through than all this other stuff that we've been doing traditionally. So We're going to talk about the demand-driven operating model, but think about it in terms of how do you operate your production sites, your supply chain, right? How can we configure it to be more agile? What are the ways that we can deal with sources of variation in our environment and disruption? What can we learn from the past, right? Because every last period of performance will show you areas that you can improve on. And in the concept of ongoing improvement, you can continue making adjustments, let alone just based on the historical performance, which is part of this demand-driven S&OP process that we're going to talk about here. How can we use buffering? This can be both in stock, time, and capacity buffers to create more agility because it helps dampen the signals within the system. It creates those layers of independence, and they provide us, in this material planning side especially, the ability to respond to whatever demand comes our way. Do we understand the range of conditions that are out there that we need to address? Are there ways that we can stress test our operating model in advance to see how well it can deal with a range of different scenarios that may emerge? So the Demand Driven Institute, I think, has built a really great chart here that kind of describes the idea of the demand-driven philosophy within what they call the adaptive enterprise model. On the right, any business needs some level of view of its future, right? What is our estimate of how much business we can do next year and the year beyond that? Will we need more resources? Will we need more production capabilities? Are there markets we want to enter? Things like that. Those are the longer term, larger grain, adaptive S&OP kind of topics that require some level of estimating. And we absolutely believe those are extremely important and relevant in the environment. At the other end of the spectrum, the demand-driven operating model is really geared to help you be pacing your operations to the real demand that's there, not the forecast, but the actual orders that are coming in. We use stock buffers here to ensure that material availability. A well-designed DDMRP buffer will ensure constant stock availability, and that makes us responsive to the market and able to pace to the real demand coming in. And then the use of time and capacity buffers helps ensure that we're leveraging our production capabilities in the best way possible to support those demand scenarios. And we think about capacity in different ways, and we'll be running a webinar here in the next few months around scheduling and execution, which brings more light to how we utilize time and capacity buffers. For today's illustrations, we're going to stay on the material planning side. We'll touch a little bit on rough cut capacity planning as part of that. But at the center here is demand-driven S&OP. And this is really how do we utilize our focus in the, I'll call it the tactical horizon, meaning, that operating window you've got. Some people would express it as the longest decoupled lead time in your bills of material. Everybody kind of knows maybe it's a 12, 14, 20-week horizon that is really kind of the operating window that most of the focus is going to be driven around. And we'll learn in here from variance analysis from the prior periods. And instead of aligning consensus demand to consensus supply, we're going to focus on this concept of model configuration. How do we make adjustments in our demand-driven operating model to give us the flexibility to deal with whatever demand patterns may come our way? So we're going to use this cycle as an iterative process to tune the model. And when we get into the demonstration, I'll show you some simple examples of it to try to illustrate how this concept would apply. But that's really what we're talking about here is demand-driven S&OP and leveraging it to improve our ability to pace to actual demand with a view to the future, but also keeping in mind that the better tuned this operating model becomes, the more we're going to be in a position where we can take our hands off the wheel and let the system kind of drive itself. A key part of that is this notion of relevant ranges. If I'm in a DDS&OP horizon, that's probably going to be shorter term, maybe 12 to 14 weeks, something in that neighborhood. If I'm thinking adaptive strategies, larger grain kind of decisions, we're going to put a new production line in this plant, and that's going to be a huge capital investment, and it'll take a year to get the additional space and the machinery put in. Those are the long-term aspects. We're focused within this. This is important, though, this idea of relevant range, because if I'm forecasting 52, 78 weeks out into the future, and my operating horizon is much shorter than that, I'm going to get a lot of flags and alerts about things that may never come to pass, that are so far down the road, I shouldn't even be worried about them. And so we want to keep these two eyes or two phases of activity kind of segregated, because these are long-term decisions. The degree of certainty on these is going to be different because they are based on larger grain kind of capital investment kind of requirements or things like that. In this period, we're really trying to just see if there's a storm on the horizon that we need to start reacting to or be prepared for, so that we can get through the process in a good way. And this is kind of a view. Every company's in a different arena depending on how heavily you are make to order or make to stock. And so we're not saying it's a one size fits all. You've got to understand that the quest for agility is going to depend a lot on the business model that you operate in your functional areas. If I'm heavily make to stock, then I'm going to really focus my energy around material planning. I'm going to use rough cut planning to make sure my capacities are there to meet the requirements of the materials over the time. If I'm heavily in a make to order environment, then it's all about how do I build flexibility into the capacity I've got, utilizing time and capacity buffers. And I mentioned earlier here, we're going to focus mostly on the material planning for today's illustration when we get into the demo. So what do we mean when we talk about configuration changes in the operating model? Well, if we're on the material planning side and you understand the concepts of demand-driven MRP, you know that the daily usage figure is a key element. An ADU value is the trailing rate of demand over the last, say, 13-week horizon. A forecasted daily usage, or FDU, would be the view of the forecast over the next 13 weeks and what that value is. And some people will utilize FDUs if they've got seasonal trends, because it helps flex the buffers up and down to meet those seasonal patterns. Others prefer to be on a trailing horizon because they don't have the implication of those seasonalities, and that's the actual demand that they get, and that's a better starting point. So the point here is whether it's usage type, order cycle values, the buffer profile assignments you create, the lead times of the items, all of these dimensions are going to influence your stock buffer positions. The more healthy those are, the less S&OP worries you're going to have, because they're already configured well to deal with whatever may come down the path. And so at the foundation of any DDS&OP quest for agility, if you will, you want to focus on setting up the system, the operating model. This is the material planning side of the operating model, so that you don't have to check on it every day, right? You're going to be fine with the inventory results. It's going to fluctuate up and down, but it's going to maintain extremely high stock availability with far, far less effort than what you would typically find in a traditional MRP environment. On the capacity side, you can look at shift parameters. You can look at using a constrained master production schedule. There's other strategies there. We're not going to really get as deep into those with the demo here. But the idea here is configuration changes to the operating model really mean tuning the model, our buffer settings, the various elements that go into those, which items are buffered, which items are not buffered. All of those things can help us get this environment set up, the operating model set up, so that it provides the right kind of behaviors as we go through time. So with that, we're going to get out of the presentation here, and we're going to go into IntuiFlow. Okay, so we're going to start with the S&OP module, and we're going to go through first. We'll show a bit of an illustration on the demand planning side, then we'll get into S&OP, and we'll go into the promotion report as a starting point. So in demand planning, what we've done is the following. We've created basically a twin environment where we have taken the items that are in the bottler location and replicated them into another location, which is our kind of our sandbox, if you will, to test our products and the like. And this is the demand plan. We're going to look at a certain products family here called the 6-pack 2-liter SKUs. You'll see that's this group here, and you can see what the current demand plan is for those SKUs going out into the future. And this is based on their historical demand patterns. If you haven't seen our demand planning solution found yet, basically what we're doing is we're taking the historical demand, and it's looking past 2 years. The dotted lines are the forecast that's being developed off the actual demands that have happened historically, and that then generates the forecast going forward for those items. We're going to look at, and we can see that this is the bottler location, and this should be the bottler 2 location. Yep. And you'll see it's the same values here on the 2 pages. So we've got the basic bottler 2 location set up as our test ground. It's going to be our sandbox, and it's pulling across all the data from the standard location that we operate. It's leaving that alone as your production environment, and we will only migrate changes back to it as we see fit based on the scenario testing that we're going to be doing. So what we're going to do is we'll go to the forecast edition here, and you'll see that the 6-pack 2-liter SKUs, this will be the demand figures for that same group of parts in the S&OP module when we come across to that. So we'll go over now to just validate. We're on the promotion tab. We're going to go to that same pack size here. And these weekly values that you would see we're going to make it for the bottler location so we can line those up. These values are the summaries of the case volumes that are expected to be sold based on the forecast across those weeks on the future horizon. And you'll see those same numbers here in this row here, right on this line, as if you can see my cursor, the 6-pack 2-liter SKUs. So we've got a base environment set up. And if we look at the comparison between the bottler environment, I got to get rid of the clear that selection here. Now we can see each item at its base location. That's the production location, and bottler 2 is our test bed. And you'll see that all these figures are lined up. You know, if you compare the 2 rows, it's the same SKU in both locations. So we've got a solid foundation from which we can start evaluating scenarios. So the projected supply report is looking at our materials going forward, and we'll go back to that pack size again just to limit our view down. So by part numbers, we can see the supply orders that we're projecting right now based on the forecast that has been brought in and its generation. What that does is allows us, for example, if these were production items, these are going to generate the workloads for our rough cut capacity planning. If these were bought in items, this would be potentially the signal that we're sending out to our suppliers. The projected inventory report is looking at the inventory positions. And this goes back to a key concept that I want to make sure we talk about here, which is this idea of alerting. We don't want to know, we don't need to study every item. We should be focused on the exceptions. So we have flags that are in the system to allow us to measure if inventories are going to go below a certain threshold of the red zone. 60% would be a medium alert, 40% would be a high alert, and anytime it goes below 0, it's going to be a critical alert. And again, based on that relevant range, we're only going to look 12 weeks out into the future. Anything beyond that is going to change by the time we get there. So let's just focus our attention in the window that we really, really need to be concerned about. We're going to look and flag demand items that come in that are 2x our average weekly demand, 3x our average weekly demand, or 500% of our average weekly demand. And that helps us understand if there's distortions in the demand signal from what we would normally encounter. And those would be a need to focus on as well. We can also look at changes in the rates of demand over the daily usage horizon. We can set this horizon. We've set it beyond our relevant range just so we've got a more thorough view of our simulations of the items going forward. We have a similar philosophy on the rough cut capacity planning. If loads are getting above 80% of capacity, it would be medium flag. When it's at capacity, it's a high flag. If it gets beyond 120% of capacity, it's going to be a critical flag. And that's kind of the lens that we've gone through. So we're going to bring these items up again, and we'll see that all of the values between the 2 locations are identical. Now, we had mentioned that the projected inventory report is an important part of our process here. And we see that one of our items is got a bit of an exposure here in its inventory. And we can see that by going to looking at its buffer projection. And you can see out here, we've got some stress on the system. This would be an example, and you can see a little bit upstream here earlier. This might be an example where at the item level, hey, it doesn't look like there's anything that wrong with this buffer. That's actually pretty darn good service. We've just got some periods of demand or something's happening in our scenario here where we might find that we have some exposure. So we have a tool called part simulation, and this is kind of scenario planning at the item level. And that item was 154286. So we're going to go to pick that item out here. And we can run the simulation, and you'll see basically the same view here that we saw in the overall report. And you can see we've got some buffer concerns here as we go forward. So let's say we're not comfortable with that and we'd like to put a little more weight into the buffer. There's some strategies that we could invoke here to help move that along into a better place. Let's say we wanted to, we could see we've got 100% service, but it's kind of skinny. We're not real comfortable with that. Even though we're getting 100% service, we're kind of getting a little low. Let's say we wanted to test what other strategies could we implement. Well, one of them would be, instead of using a blended daily usage horizon, we could possibly adopt a forecasted usage horizon. And this is now going to plan to the future. We can see this kind of lumpiness in our demand and evaluate whether we would get a benefit from that. And what we find here is this is really not adequate. We've still got some pressure here, even though we have FDU helping us. This has got a generally declining pattern. We've just got some distortions. You can see this cluster of demand coming in that may not be helping us. So perhaps that's not going to be the best answer. This item may also be one of our slower movers. So it may be an item that, hey, we're building it once a week. We've got it set up to generate a replenishment order on an order cycle of once every 7 production days. We can evaluate that with a 14-day horizon and see if that helps us. Part of why that helps is that now we've got less of an exposure here, but we've still got some pressure on it, that we've got more weight in our green zone. We're producing more stock at a given point in time. That raises our expected average inventory, but it still hasn't quite solved that. So I think at that point, my recommendation would be we would take a look at utilizing a higher level variation setting. So a 24 would be a higher level variation setting, and we can evaluate this. And this is the whole point of doing this is to understand. So now we've got our buffer configured in a much healthier way. We've resolved the stock issues related to these expected demand clusters. They may or may not come, but at least we know we can have confidence that given those parameters coming through, we're going to have good position. We've got good inventory turns. We're getting 100% service. We can pretty much be in a set it and forget it mode. Not that you would plan and do all of your S&OP at the item level. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I am kind of trying to illustrate the concept here of if we build a foundation where our buffered items are really set up correctly, we have diminished the workload of S&OP dramatically because they are already kind of conditioned. We found this because we fed it a forecast and we found that that forecast jeopardized the setting that it was already on. And so it gives us a chance to start to tune those buffer parameters, get to a better place, obviously monitor them on your monthly S&OP cycle, but do it in a fashion where you're trying to get things set up so you can, like I said, set it and forget it. The more we can get into auto planning, autopilot, where I don't have to be responsible for making all these adjustments, the better off we're going to be. So that's looking at it at an item level. And we haven't made any changes. If we were satisfied with this, you would simply save that into your part settings. All those changes in the configuration would go back. We're doing this as kind of an illustration of the technique and the idea of preparing your operating model to be as resilient as possible. There may still be some exception cases to deal with, but this is a way you can deal with it, especially when you saw, like in that inventory report, this was the one item that was having some pressure here out in the April timeframe. All these other ones are kind of okay. Yes, a little bit skinny on the buffer zones, but not too hysterical, nothing really to be too concerned about. So this part sim feature was there to really help us illustrate, a way of reviewing those kind of edge cases that may be out there. Okay, so let's go back now. We didn't deploy any of those changes. Now let's say we want to think about it more from the standpoint of a big demand campaign. Let's go back to our demand planning module, and we're going to go to the 2-liter pack size in the bottler 2, our sandbox location. And what we're going to do is consider making a evaluation of a promotional change, right? We're going to put in a promotional campaign here that will help us. I don't know what's happening here. Hang on. Oh, it was way too long. Well, this is unusual. There we go. All right. So we're going to go to the 2-liter pack size. And what we're going to see here is we're going to go out to the 2-liter packs or 6-pack of 2 liters out in week 17. We've got an expected forecast of 119,000 units or cases. Let's up that to say 250,000 cases, more than double the weekly demand. What that will do is if we go to those same SKUs in the Navigator, and we can see the impact on them. And I don't have the bottler location filtered here, but we'll see the impact of these forecasts. So what happens is that the share of this item 0138 rather will be distributed across to the items in the bottler 2 location for the various SKUs based on their representative share of the overall demand, their unique demand patterns and the like, right? So we're trying to plan it a category. This one doesn't even get an adjustment. Oh, that's the bottler location. Here's a bottler 2 site and so forth. So what we've done is we've set up a campaign. We've kind of reviewed it internally. We think this is appropriate. We're going to go do a sale through Walmart or something like that. And that's going to be the demand that we want to satisfy. What we want to do now then is bring that back into the S&OP module to help assess the impact that that was going to have on our items. So that will go back into the S&OP module. We're waiting for that job to complete here. And what we'll now do is we're just going to change the attributes now for the bottler 2 location. That's the one that we ran the change in demand on. We'll go ahead and re-trigger the S&OP run. So you would typically go through some iterations on this. And the nice thing is you can very, very rapidly see the impact of those changes. This guy's circle. Okay. We'll go back to the projected supply report here, and we're going to look at the part numbers in sequence again. And you can see there's starting to be some adjustments in the plans between the locations, right? Because we've got more requirements for those 6-pack 2-liter SKUs coming into the bottler 2, which is our test location. When we go over to projected inventory, we're going to see a similar story starting to emerge where the bottler 2 sites are going to have more pressure on them in the weeks surrounding that campaign that we're implementing. You can see the pressure here in the bottler 2 where we've got some more negatives compared to their cousins on the bottler side of the story. And then of course too, we would see that in the promotional tab itself. So here we'll see if we just filter to the bottler 2 location, we look out to the week of the 17th, and we get to the right pack size, you'll see that 250,000 case demand coming across. If we were looking at the preforms, their demand would be coming in a week earlier because it's cascading and forecasting the requirements down through the bill of material to the appropriate lens. So what we see here now is that we've got more pressure on our inventory, and we'll just filter to the bottler 2 sites materials. A lot of issues here. If we look at some of these, you'll see the very steep period of demand coming during that period of the promotional campaign. Afterwards, the buffer starts to get itself back into a good position. But during this period, right during that week of the campaign or the prior or the week following, we've got a lot of pressure on these SKUs that we need to be able to deal with. And so the question would be, how would we accommodate that? Well, the first thing we want to do is make sure we set the production plan earlier, right? So we have a feature in the system called intelligent adjustments, where what it does is it will alter the buffer configuration, pre-building stock ahead of time to help address these inventory exposures that we've got. And what it starts to do then is have an influence on our CCP. So we're going to go ahead and run the intelligent adjustment feature on here. And what you'll see in our bottler 2 requirements is that the picture in the projected inventory view will be improved. It's not going to be perfect yet, but it's going to be in much better shape with far less of the critical stock positions on it. So you can see here, we're in bottler 2. Those red critical alerts have disappeared on our SKUs here, giving us confidence. And if you look at the items themselves, and we'll look at some of the heavier runners. You'll see we should see some adjustment factors that have been implemented here. There, you can see there's a small moderate adjustment factor on that item. Let's check the lemon less sugar. Yeah, there's been a buffer adjustment. What that does is it raises the height of the yellow zone, which triggers a supply order earlier, which helps ensure that you've got stock available for that campaign. And what that means is that it's going to pre-build stock for that. And so we don't have to manually configure that. The system can do the work for us. Now what we would want to do then is be able to compare our capacity loads in the RCCP portion of the reports. And what we've got here is a view of the production line at the two locations. The bottler is the main location. Bottler 2 is the proxy location where we're doing the rough cut planning. What we've done here is we've utilized rough cut capacity planning in a finite scheduling mode. We went into our editor here, open up another view on the resource side, and where we took the line 1 in the bottler 2 location and made it as a constraint. We're going to edit that change right now. I'm going to rerun the RCCP so you can get an idea of what the raw comparison was between the two environments. We'll go in here on RCCP. Oops, sorry. I grabbed the wrong thing. Sorry about that. And we'll just rerun the RCCP portion of the simulation here to respect the fact that we changed it to an unconstrained view, because it's helpful to have that view to get to see, like on the inventory side where you've got negative exposures, on the production capacity side where you may have peak load requirements, and you can see a big surge of capacity required in the week of the 24th, right around that promotional campaign. If we look at our load graphs in the bottler, we're okay. These ranges are acceptable. Typically in production, if you're kind of bouncing around what your rough capacity is, you might have actually shorted the capacity hours in your assumptions here to give you a little bit of elbow room. But typically you would be able to make adjustments and manage this kind of level of variation. Whereas this kind of a distortion where you are far above it is going to require some changes to our model. What that would mean, we've already pulled the material requirements earlier, but what we now need to do is level load, and we would utilize like a constrained master production schedule to deal with that. We're still several weeks away from that campaign. I wouldn't be taking action just yet. I would be just checking it, making sure it's kind of manageable from that standpoint. If this big bar was coming up, 2-3 weeks out, I'd be really concerned, because if we wait too long to pre-build stock for that item, we're going to be in peril. But kind of consistent with the demand-driven philosophy, the more we can wait to take action, in other words, the old adage, don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes, because your shot will be more accurate. The longer we can wait before we make adjustments, the better position we're going to be in, because things may change, right? We may find that there were some short sales on some of those other items. People got wind that their campaign was coming up, so they quit buying the weeks prior, which meant that the inventory didn't disappear the way the original forecast was predicting. There's all sorts of permutations on this that can evolve, that can be influential. So again, keep your horizon short, focus on, like we showed in the scenario on the item, like we're looking at here with the intelligent adjustments for the buffer settings, of those stock positions that were exposed. Not all of them got an adjustment, as you saw. So it's not like just because there was a campaign, every item needed an equivalent treatment. And the tools are there to really be able to discern which items need attention, which ones don't. If I've got a big campaign going and I'm way overstock on an item, who cares? Good. It'll help me get rid of that inventory, and we don't have to be too, overly concerned about that. So hopefully those illustrations were helpful. There's a lot more we could show here, but we don't really have the time in the webinar today to cover all those topics. And I've still got a few key slides to go through here. So let's just kind of finish up here. What are we looking for? What we're trying to do with demand-driven S&OP is identify those risks. I've shown you a few illustrations in the short demonstration we did. Again, it's changed the configuration of the operating model. We made adjustments on that one item. We could deploy those into production, and we would be in a much more confident position to ensure that. And again, the idea is build a strong foundation, because when you do that, it's going to reduce the amount of effort that goes into doing the exception management. We can generate sales, revenue, profit projections off the demand planning module. We can give you views of inventory and supplier requirements, understanding working capital, convert those into pallet positions in a warehouse. There's all sorts of stuff that the S&OP module can help with. And obviously to looking at the rough cut capacity planning, which many of you indicated was your primary concern of the S&OP activity that you're focused on. And that obviously too can also cover workforce requirements. Can't say enough about the benefit of scenario planning. We've done it by replicating data in our production site into a twin environment within the same instance of IntuiFlow. That gives us a platform where we can make changes without regard to disrupting production data. We can do it in an iterative process to gain a better understanding of where the parameters might be. And with a simple script to replicate your data in like that, you would have great flexibility of being able to model these kind of scenarios. I only did one scenario, but obviously we could stress test and take that campaign up more. We could look at doing it at an isolated level. There's all sorts of different scenarios that you can imagine. And my coaching would be, less is more. It's fascinating work to do. It's very, very interesting, but it can also be a little bit, it can get a little bit into boiling the ocean if you're not careful. So it's all about focus on the exceptions, build agility into your model. The Part Sim tool provides a quick checkpoint. It's very visual. It helps you, make those changes that may be necessary. And obviously, at the end of the day, the more we can improve that agility and resilience and how we're operating, the better off we're all going to be. Your management focus should be on the right things, the range of forecasts, test the DDOM, all of these points. I think I just mentioned them. It's really about building that flexibility into your overall operating model. I think we got one last question to ask y'all, and then we'll take audience questions. So hopefully you found that there's some strategies here that we're illustrating that could help you get to a much, much better place in terms of building agility and resilience. How are we doing, Kevin?
We have, I would say, 75% of our responses.
Give it a few more seconds. Conscious of time here.
All right, 10 more seconds.
Excellent. So 90% of the audience agrees that this would help them create better agility. 10% disagree. So would love to know the reasons why those individuals feel that way and understand their perspectives on that. But obviously 90% favorable is a pretty positive indication that we're on a good path here. So with that, Kevin, I think that's my last slide. Let me just check here. Yep. Any audience questions that we can handle at this point? We've got a few more minutes left.
We do. We had one question come in that one of our solution consultants, Wally, answered, but I'll go ahead and echo it. Are those functionalities available in the NetSuite version?
Unfortunately, they are not. Some of it you can do in the S&OP module there, but we don't have the demand planning functionality on the NetSuite version at this time. Some of our NetSuite clients that have been using our native version have opted to go with the enterprise edition because of the enhanced functionality we provide.
All right, a couple more questions. What is the best way to start implementing S&OP?
I think start with the idea and build stakeholder support for this idea that the path to creating better agility and more responsiveness is different than what conventional S&OP is about. So it starts with getting, that point I made many times about embracing this idea that the future is uncertain. So let's figure out how to be more flexible and more agile, right? And I would really, really encourage building stakeholder support for that. Once you have that buy-in and perhaps some of these illustrations can help drive that story, then I think you've got your organization oriented in the right way to focus on the right priorities, which are very, very different than what conventional S&OP is about.
Another question I have is it possible to send supplier projected requirements from Intuiflow?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Many of our clients are already doing that. It's quite a useful function of the system because it's not based on conventional MRP safety stock. It's based on what your projected buffer requirements are going to be, and those are different signals. And what we've heard from clients is that by providing that forward rolling forecast, their supplier relationships have improved. It's more stable. It's not like, hey, last month we sent you these requirements, now it's all changed, and therefore we got to cancel orders and now expedite others. It's a much more stable environment to be in.
All right. Last question is there a way to project space requirements in Intuiflow?
Yes, absolutely. Because you know your inventory levels, if you've loaded your packaging ratios, you can derive from that the resulting pallet requirements. For example, let's say you palletize everything. This was a bottling story. They typically will put layers on a pallet and put the cases of the materials like the 6-pack 2 liters, and they'll know that they are going to need 100 positions or 100 pallet positions of space in the warehouse, and they can take that across all the SKUs in their families. Very, very easy to do. If you've got volume-oriented elements, you can do that as well. So very, very easy to do.
All right, we
Okay.
did have one more question come in that I can actually answer. May we receive this presentation by email? The answer to that question is yes. I will send an email out shortly after this presentation to everyone who has attended and registered.
Well, thanks everybody for your participation in the webinar today and your participation in the polling questions. Kevin will be getting the materials out to you. There will be a recording link as well. I really believe that this is a path to a much more healthy supply chain planning environment in companies. I think it is clear that some of the messages have resonated with the vast majority of you. So just want to wish you all the best on your demand-driven journey. If there's anything we can do to help you out along the way, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.